Hello, on this video I'm going to talk about arrays. Before I get there, let's talk about the integer first. So whenever I declare a variable, let's say I'm going to declare variable int age equals 21. So when I execute this line of code here, behind the scenes, it's going to create for you a single space in memory named age, and this age here is going to this memory space, and then inside this space I'm going to start a number 21, which is this number right here. So the number 21 gets saved in the memory space that I created here. So this code here creates a single space in memory. If I want to create an array, instead of writing this code, I'm going to put a number here, and when I execute this line of code, it's going to create a space in memory for you that can host 3 values. So instead of being a single value like we created before, it's now going to create 3 spaces in memory because you indicate 3 right here. So age now, which is an array, is referring to 3 spaces in memory instead of 1. So here you declare and it creates the space in memory. And now if I want to save a number right here, I'm going to use the name of my array, which is age. Then I'm going to put the index of whatever position I want to save that on. So now I have age on index 0, and this here is the index 0. This one here is the index 1, and then the last one is index 2. Now note that the index starts with 0. So even though you declare a array of size 3, the index only goes to 2 because it starts as 0. So the index of this array are 0, 1, and 2. So 3 spots. So when you assign 21 to age index 0, the index 0 is this one here, and here it gets placed 21. Alright, so what if I want to put a value right here on index 2? So if that's the case, I'm going to put index 2, and then on index 2 I'm going to put 44. So now age index 2, which is this spot right here, gets number 44 because that's what I'm assigning to. If you assign your age on index 1, it's going to be placed right here. And you can also assign a different value to the same location. So on the location 0, if I assign value 22, the 21 gets erased, and then 22 overwrites the past value that you had on index 0. So this is the way that you create an array, and then this is the way that you assign values to that given array. In other words, you write values to the array. Now, if you want to read the values from the array, all you have to do is either create a variable or just play directly. So I'm going to just play the value directly. So this is how I'm going to display whatever value it's on index number 2. And index number 2 is 44. So I'm going to run this program, and I get the 44 right here. Or instead of doing that, you can also create a variable. I'm going to create a variable integer, and integer is the data type of my array. So integer x equals the value of, let's say, index 0. And then I can display the x So I can get the value of index 0, which is 22. So you can either create a variable and get the value or display the value directly. All right, so let's take a look on a couple of problems right here. So we know that this is an array of size 3 or length 3. So therefore we can only assign values to 3 indexes. So index 0, 1, and 2. So what happens if we try to assign a value to an index that doesn't exist? So this is size 3, but we're trying to assign a value to index 3. Remember, index 3 doesn't exist on this array here. So when you do that, you're going to have a problem. And the problem that you have here, if you look right here in the bottom, is going to say index 3 is out of valid index of range. All right, so here we assign 3 values. Now let's display all 3 values. So if I want to display all these values, I'm going to use the cout and then age on index 0. And then I do the same thing for the other 3 indexes. So now if I run this program, I get the numbers that I saved initially. Now, this array is only 3, but what if I have an array with length 30 or 300? So if that's the case, I would have to write 300 lines of code here. Now, I don't want to do that. So one of the good things about the array is that it works very well with loops. So if you can see here, the index starts at 0, 1, and 2, and you can use whatever loop you want. I prefer using for loop for this case. So I'm going to use a for loop that starts at 0 and ends at 3. Now notice that I'm putting the less than 3. That means the my index, will never be 3. The max is going to go is 2. So if I put a less than equals to 3, then 3 is included on the range, but I'm putting less than 3, so 3 is actually not included on the range. And that's very important because if you remember, there is no such a thing as index 3 on my array. So pay attention on where you go here. So now I'm going to get this cout. I'm going to put it right here inside the body of the loop. And instead of putting a hard code number, I'm going to put the I, which is the value from my loop. So now if I run this program, it displays the numbers because it looped through every single index on the array. So that's a very good thing, because if I had 300 values here, for example, this code would not change except by the fact that you do need to change the upper bound of your for loop. But you would not have to write 300 lines of code. So the whole point here is that for loop work very well whenever you need to go through every single item of your array. And if you want to assign values as well, that is also okay. So if you want to do something like this, I times 10, for example, or whatever value you want to do, that is totally okay as well. So I'm going to duplicate this loop, and then I'm going to display here. So in this case, I have one loop to assign values and another loop to display values. So this is okay as well. I'm going to run this program. And then it assigns the value 0, 10, and 20 right here on this loop, and on this loop it displays the value. So loops work very well with arrays. All right, so in array you can put whatever you want to put. In my case here, I put a bunch of integers, numbers, but you can put whatever you want to put. You can put strings, floats, characters, or booleans, whatever you want to put. Now, on your array, you can also put a series of array inside of an array. So that's what we call the two-dimensional array. So in our previous example, we had something like this, where we had an array with 3 indexes, right? 0, 1, and 2. So it was array size 3. We can do this. This is called the one-dimensional array, or we can create an array with a series of array on each column right here in this case. So if I want to create something like this, in this case here, this would be a two-dimensional array. And here we have rows, and another row. And then here we have columns, column and column, column. So obviously this is the row of index 0, index 1, index 2, and index 3. And then here you have the columns of index 0, 1, 2. So this here would be a two-dimensional array. Now, on two-dimensional array, now we have two sets of indexes to get to something. So if I want to, for example, get to this location right here, and let's say this location has number 3. If I want to know the index of number 3, I would get the row and then the column. So the location of the number 3 here happens to be row 0 and column 1. So if I want to, for example, get the location of number 103, so what would be the location of the number 103 here, or this memory location? It would be row 2 and then column 2. So when you have a two-dimensional arrays, we're working with rows and columns. So I'm going to put a number 5 right here, and let's create this two-dimensional array, and then let's assign a value on this location here. So first, let's create this two-dimensional array. So to create this two-dimensional array, I'm going to decide on my data type. In this case, the data type is integer. And then I'm going to have the name of my array. The name of my array is going to be age again. The name here is irrelevant. You can name whatever you want to name. And then 2 sets of brackets. The first set of brackets is going to be the row. So how many rows do I need for these two-dimensional arrays? Happens to be 1, 2, 3, 4. So I have 4 rows. So 4 rows. And then how many columns I have? I have 1, 2, 3 columns. So 3 columns. So when I run this code here, it creates this two-dimensional array for me. Now, if I want to assign value 5 on this location here, I'm going to get the age, and then I'm going to get the 2 coordinates that I need, and this one happens to be row 0. So I'm going to put 0 here, and then the column happens to be 2. So 2. When I run this code, I assign value 5 right here on this location. Now let's assign another value right here. So to assign the value 3 on that location, I'm going to copy here to be lazy. So the value number 3 on this location will be row 2. So row 2. And then column is 0. So with this code, I assign the number 3 on this location. The whole point of the two-dimensional arrays is that now we have several options to assign value here. All right, so let's create one more array, and I'm going to store some strings on it for this time. So let me erase everything here, and then I'm going to delete this. So now I want to create a new array. I want to create a array that store integers, and I want something like this, where I have two columns and let's say 4 rows. Is this 4 rows? So 1, 2, 3, 4. You want two. So on the row column, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So this array is 4 rows by 2 columns. All right, so let's create this array. So to create an array with the 2-dimension, I'm going to put the data type, which is string. Then the name of my array, I'm going to name this city states. And then the 2 values that tell me how many rows and how many columns I have. So in this case, I have 4 rows. So I'm going to put number 4 here. And I have 2 columns. So it's a 4 by 2 array. So now, right here, I want to start inserting values. So on the city state, let's say here I want to store value Seattle. And the states, I want to store the value Washington here. All right, so to do that, I'm going to use the name of my array and then the index of this row here for this specific cell. The index of this is going to be 0, 0. And on 0, 0, I want to store Seattle. And the coordination of this value will be row 0 and column 1. So row 0 and column 1, I'm going to store Washington. And then I'm going to do the same thing with Portland. And also I'm going to put here LA, and so I'm going to copy and paste. All right, here's the code that I wrote to assign these values on my array. All right, so now the question is, how do we display these values? Well, we can write a single cout for every single value, or we can use loops to display this. So let's use loops for this. So first I'm going to write a for loop. And then for the for loop, I want to print the columns. So I'm going to put here, instead of I'm going to put C as in column, so I won't get lost. And then how many columns I have? 2. So I'm going to put number 2 here. So now if I decided to print column, and I'm going to print all zeros for now. All right, so if I run this program, I'm going to get Seattle and Portland. That's a problem. That's not what I meant to do. And that's because I did right here. So I put a column instead of row. So I'm going to put 0 here, and then the column goes here. So now with that, I should print Seattle and Washington. All right, so I'll run this program again, and there it is. I have Seattle and Washington. All right, good. So what if I want to display every single value here? So first, let me print something like this, or maybe let me put a set width here of 10, and that should give me some space. And set width, I'm gonna need a Iomanip. Iomanip. All right. So make sure you include this line here, and now we can use the set with. So let's run this program again to see what we have. And here we have Seattle and Washington. All right, great. So let's continue with this program. So on this loop here, I print the two columns of the first row. And I'm printing the columns because I'm putting a column right here. And then only the row 0 because I have hard coded. But instead of having hard code here, I want to create another loop that will move the index down right here on the rows, so then I can print all the values. So for that, I'm going to create another for loop inside this for loop. Then I'm going to move my cout statement inside this loop. And this here, and instead of I'm going to have rows, so it's a little easier for me to understand. And I know I have 1, 2, 3, 4 rows, so I'm going to put 4 here. And right here, instead of putting number 0, which is hard coded, I'm going to put the letter R. So now it's going to loop through every single value of my array. So I'm going to run this code now. And when I run this code, sure enough, it runs through every single value. It's a little ugly here. I'm going to put a cout right here, outside the inner loop, but inside the outer loop. So this is going to break every single row when I'm looping through this array. So I'm going to run the program again. And here I have my values that I used before. All right. And if you want to display the values on a vertical instead of horizontal, all you have to do is start with a row first. So here I'm going to put row, row, and row. And then I'm going to change from 2 to 4 because I have 4 rows. And then the internal loop, I'm going to put columns. And then instead of 4, I'm going to put 2. And I'm doing this because I have 2 columns. And now if I run this program again, I'm going to have the values displaying on vertical instead of horizontal. And LA got a little problem right here. And I think because Los Angeles has more than 10 letters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So if I change my set width to 12, that will align properly. And there it is. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is 3-dimensional array or 4-dimensional or 5-dimensional array. In case if you want to store another value right here in this array, you can. So that would create a 3-dimensional array. So let's say you have here a 2-dimensional array. And this array happens to be, let's say, a 3x3 array. So this is a 2-dimensional array. So because 2-dimensional, we just need 2 indexes. But you could have something like this, and that would be a 3-dimensional array. My drawing skills are horrible, I know that. All right, so on a 3-dimensional array, you'd have something like this. It'd be more like a cube. And if that's the case, then you'd have 3 indexes to identify each value within your array. So just for curiosity, let's identify this one here. So let's say you have here number 10. So number 10 would have the index of row, column, and depth in this case. So it would be row, column, and depth. Oops, this is a D. Row, column, depth. So the row of this value here would be 0, 1. So row 1. The column would be this one here, which is 0, 1 as well. And the depth would be this dimension right here. So the depth is 0. So 1, 1, 0 would be location of this value. Now, if you have something like this one here, let's say I want a location of number 0. So number 0 would be also row 1. Column would be now column 2. So this would be 2. And then the dimension would be 1. So there will be a 3-dimensional array. Now you can also have a 4-dimensional array, or 5-dimensional, or 6-dimensional. You can have as many dimensions as you want. Don't forget that the more dimensions you have, the more complicated this picture here gets. And also, the more dimension you have, the more indexes you're going to have to deal with. Usually, if you have more than 3-dimensional array, most likely you're doing this too complicated, and most likely there is a better or easier solution. So only use 3, 4, or more dimensional arrays if you absolutely have to. Otherwise, don't do it. Find another solution. All right, so that's all for this video. Thanks for watching.